Welcome back. Thank you for staying with us. Now, the gap between the rich and the rest is alarmingly widening, with the latest report painting a conflicting portrait of Kenya's growing economy. 125 of Kenya's wealthiest individuals hold more wealth than 42 million Kenyans combined. So why is Kenya getting wealthier and Kenyans poorer? We debate this contradiction on the broadcast tonight, and joining me to make sense of this is Beverly Musili from the she is the Global Inequality Officer at Oxfam. Beverly, thank you very much for making time for us tonight on TV 47.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Abu Bakar.
We are having this discussion at the backdrop of a report released by the organization you work with, which is Oxfam. Just on an overview point of the state of inequality in the country, how would you sum it up as?
Yes, thank you so much, Abu Bakar, for having me on your show. So in terms of inequality and the status in Kenya, the study that we did paints a very grim picture. And I want to start from the point of view of poverty. Poverty and inequality are two different concepts, but they're interrelated, so they reinforce each other. So if, for example, you come from a poorer background, then you will experience some forms of inequality. So you'll experience differentials in how you access certain opportunities, how you access certain social services. So we've seen over the years poverty rates increase in Kenya. In 2015-2016, KNBS had published that poverty was around 36.1%, and then in 2022, poverty increased to 39.8%, so 40% basically. So you can see that poverty has been increasing. At the same time, we also find that extreme poverty in Kenya is also increasing. So we have about half of the population is experiencing extreme poverty. So people are living on less than 130 shillings a day. And now if you compare globally, Kenya has the 16th highest extreme poverty rate. If you look at 130 shillings in a day, that is meant to cater for a family, for food, for transport, for electricity, for rent, also take care of the children and the family that you're living with, and basic utilities. So a lot of people are not able to afford that, basically.
Beverly, if one is to look at the capital and look at the glittering buildings of Nairobi, look at the numbers, Treasury and Development Partners release of the GDP growing by 5% consecutively, say for 2020, one would paint a picture of a country getting wealthier. But in reality, Kenyans are getting poorer. Is there a disconnect?
Yes, there's a huge disconnect, because the people who are benefiting from that growth you have mentioned, I think on average it has been 5%, except I think in 2020. So only a few people are benefiting from that growth. That is because of many different drivers, many different factors. Number one is the state of public services in Kenya. Again, is also the tax system that we currently have, and the increase in tax levies that are being imposed, especially on salaried workers, and then also land inequality. So how land ownership is concentrated in the hands of very few people. So those people are able to multiply their wealth. And land is also a huge source of wealth in Kenya. Then another driver is also generally the state of the economy and economic performance. So issues such as debt, the growing debt that we have as a country, also is crowding out spending on essential public services, which poor middle income are the ones who rely on those services the most. So if you say that, yes, the economy is growing, that growth is not being felt in the pockets of the majority of Kenyans. Yes.
And who in this case then is the economy working for if it's not being felt in the pockets of Kenyans, Beverly?
Yes, so it's working for the wealthy individuals. These are people who have access to certain networks, have access to opportunities, and are able to multiply their wealth. And if you look at the concept of social mobility, I want to start from just a foundational perspective, right? So public services are very critical. Health, education are very critical for social mobility. Education in particular is one of those inequality busting sectors. Health is another very important one. If you start from even maternal health and then child health, because that improves, your cognitive functioning, your cognitive development. You have better literacy rates. You're able to transition throughout all your years of schooling, and then you have better access to labor opportunities, labor market opportunities that are economically productive. If you're a wealthy individual, you are able to access better quality schools with better quality teachers and the like. So therefore you have, it's like starting a race, right? Almost 5 steps ahead. That's why we're saying it's very critical for the government to make sure they're investing in public services so that we're all starting from a level playing field. And we all have, access to basic, decent healthcare, and we have access to basic and decent and quality education as well, and social protection. So those are very critical for reducing that inequality so that we're all able to at least start on an even playing field.
Beverly, if I am a politician, thank God I'm not one,
yes.
or I am someone in office who is being ranked based on the performance of an economy, and you look at the economy performing at 5%, say for 2020, you'd say you are impacting the economy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do those in offices, in your view, understand how harsh this disconnect of poverty and inequality is?
I think they are becoming more and more aware. I think also numbers do not lie. If poverty rates increased, this is KNBS that reported this, actually increased from 36%.
Kenya National Bureau of Statistics.
Increased from 36% to close to 40%. Those are government statistics, so numbers do not lie. Again, if we're looking at the cost of food, which we're also saying has increased almost by 50% since 2020, that means that a lot of Kenyans are living a very harsh life. They're not able to afford basic amenities, basic food, which they need for themselves and their families. I also want to talk about the issue of food insecurity and food poverty, which we have also seen the food insecurity increased by 17 million over 2014 and 2024. So the issue of food insecurity is also something that should be very telling to the government, that this economic growth does not mean that people are living better quality lives. And we also need to go back to the issue of why is this happening, and like the tax system I was talking about. Right now you find there are quite a number of levies that are being imposed on our salaries. Affordable housing, social health insurance fund. So we have diminishing incomes. So the income you had a few years ago is not the income that you have now, meaning your purchasing power has gone down. And also what we want the government to do, for example, is also to review the tax collection system. Right now there's over-reliance on, for example, payee and VAT, which are considered some of the easier to tax sectors because they're at source. And if you look at the KRA numbers, I think in 2024-2025, in terms of revenue performance, they collected 560 billion from payee, 327 billion from VAT, and then just 304 billion from corporate tax. So these sectors, payee, VAT, are very easy to tax. It's not even a lot of effort in terms of taxation. So we want them to also review the tax system so that you're not disproportionately burdening now the middle income and those who are salaried, because you'll find that, again, if you're reducing people's incomes, then you're very likely to push those people into poverty.
Just on the numbers, is it the case in this report, the findings of Oxfam, that 125 Kenyans have more wealth than 42 million Kenyans combined?
Yes, that is the current status. So they have more wealth than 42.6 million Kenyans. And there are different ways that you can calculate that, which are also available in the report that lead us to draw those conclusions.
And often in these debates of inequality and the gap between the rich and the rest, this is not necessarily a unique case in Kenya, isn't it? The global inequality rate has been widely increasing as well.
Yes, so even in terms of inequality, you can look at it between countries and also within countries. So this report was looking within the Kenyan context, but we do appreciate and acknowledge that there's also inequality between countries, and you can look at that if it's the developed and underdeveloped countries, the issue of climate inequality, where African countries are the ones who face worsening climate impacts, that we did not contribute to the climate crisis. And then now you find the developed countries, again, are the ones who contributed it, and they have the resources to adapt, to mitigate, to recover from climate impacts, which we do not have as African countries. So there are those global disparities.
Beverly, as we know, Kenya has a two-system of governance. With the 2010 constitution, the devolved system of governance was presented as a silver bullet to address some of the challenges with inequality and poverty. Looking at these numbers, will it be a harsh judgment to say devolution has not necessarily addressed the question of inequality?
That's a tough question. I don't want to give a yes and no answer. I do want to say there have been improvements in some of the regions because of devolution. Some of the ASAL, some of the marginalized counties, because of devolution, I think now have better access to infrastructure that they previously did not have. And also devolution came with the promise of bringing services closer to the people, which I believe it has succeeded on that front. We do also need to consider some of the structural issues affecting devolution that have prevented it from fully reaching its potential as was envisioned under the Constitution. The delayed disbursements, reduced the capitation issues, some of the challenges with own source revenue that counties have. They're also not maximizing in terms of the own source revenue potential. And then devolved corruption is another issue because there's even the little resources, I think you should be able to use them in a more productive manner. And I think those challenges have also been reported in different Auditor General reports that they do for each of the counties.
I have a quote here from the Executive Director of Oxfam Kenya, Mwongera Mutiga. He says, and I quote, inequality is not a natural condition, it is deliberate outcome of unjust policies and political inaction. For far too long, the gap between the rich and the poor has been allowed to grow unchecked, while millions struggle just to survive. This injustice is no longer tolerable. It is time for bold, decisive action. So we are not poor by default.
Yes.
We are poor because of policies.
Yes. So it's basically a policy and a political choice that we are in this situation that we are in. And that means then there is an opportunity for the government to address this. They need to take very serious action in terms of coming up with targets to address this issue of growing economic inequality in the country. Also by addressing the root causes of this. And like we keep saying, it's not a natural disaster, it's by design. So what can we do tangibly about issues such as, for example, corruption, which we know are seriously affecting the country? Recently, I saw just a few days ago, the Institute of Social Accountability report that Kenya is losing approximately 3 billion a day to corruption. Corruption in various forms could be conflict of interest, could be the tender opportunities, the contracts, but certain individuals are benefiting from doing business with government. This is not, for example, wealth that you have created. So again, addressing some of those structural issues that we know are being man-made. Yeah, they're man-made decisions, man-made choices that are leading us to this situation.
Some have faulted the capitalistic nature of Kenya's market and suggested that why not try our neighbors' format of communism and wealth redistribution? Does that work in this case?
Wow. I think what we are also talking about is the taxation system and looking at how we can tax the wealthy, tax those who have higher incomes in a more targeted way, so that we do have that redistributive effect, and it's felt within the entire economy. Again, we also do want just things that we can do in the country, better public finance management. So even the little resources that we get from taxes, from grants, from debt, and the likes, we should be able to use those in a more productive manner that is geared towards development. Right now we have a situation, let me talk about the debt issue, for example. We have a situation where 68.3% of government revenue is going to debt servicing. Yes, we have domestic and we also have external debt, but we have a situation that's like a double tragedy because we've accumulated this debt that we have to repay. But if I were to ask you, Abubakar, about whether you feel that this debt has been driven by development purposes, you may not be able to agree with that. So we have accumulated debt, but it has not gone towards development. Again, the debt is very costly, especially if you look at now, the government is shifting towards more domestic borrowing, which is extremely expensive. A recent study we did showed that out of the total domestic debt we have accumulated, 70% is going to interest payments alone. 30% is the principal. So again, are we making better fiscal choices that are prudent and again are development oriented so that we're able to address some of these structural issues that are leading to the growing inequality? And
just talking of the debt repayment,
yes.
Debt repayment is twice our education budget.
Yes, it's twice.
And 15 times
yes,
our health budget.
Yeah. So we have I think a bit of skewed priorities. We're not focusing our efforts on the right things. And again, it's some of the fiscal decisions that we're making and some of the policy choices, even in our macroeconomics, that are leading us to this kind of unsustainable path. Debt is now crowding out just basic investment in basic public services such as health and education. If 68.3% is going to debt repayment and you only have, now let's just say like 30% to cater for the counties, to cater for public sector wages, cater for the constitutional officers, cater for the advisors, then even the few resources that we do have, I think we need to really relook at how are we managing our public finances.
And as we conclude, Beverly, there is no equal society anywhere on earth.
Yes.
That would be too utopian, isn't it? What is the best path, in your view, in 30 seconds, to Kenya being a more even society?
Yes. First is we need to make our tax system more progressive. And that could mean looking at different ways to tax wealth. Let me not say tax the wealthy, but tax sources of wealth. So could be property taxation, for example. And that way we will be able to have better distribution across the economy. Something else we need to look at is the aspect of gender. Because we also do have a situation where there's a lot of gender inequality, which again reinforces that economic inequality. So we need to look at the underlying gender issues that we're facing in the country. And then also our labor market structure is something we also need to really reconsider, because right now we have a very large informal sector. And yes, they are hard to tax, but again, the informality of the sector means that they have limited labor protection. And lastly, again, is just the tax system, so that the middle income salaried workers are not disproportionately burdened. Just looking at different ways to tax corporations, so that there's a fairer tax system. Yeah.
Beverly, thank you. And on a lighter note, if 125 Kenyans own as much as 42 million, if the 125 decide to leave the country, what happens to the rest of us? You don't need to answer that. We're making sense of the gap between the rich and the rest in the country. Nearly half of the population, according to Oxfam's report, live in extreme poverty on less than 130 shillings per day, which is $1. 125 Kenyans own as much wealth as 42 million Kenyans. And by the way, if their wealth is to be arranged in the format of 100 shillings note, the report says it will cover the entire of Nairobi city. Well, that is where we leave tonight's edition of TV47. Thanks for watching. I'm Abubakar Abdullahi. On behalf of the entire program, bye for now. Enjoy the rest of our programs.